So, I have a hard time talking about Ben Platt because to me, he is the embodiment of a term I've coined, Schrodinger's Nepo baby. For those uninitiated, a Nepo baby is an identifier for a person, usually someone in the film, television, or theater industry, who has attained a level of success and opportunity in the field, largely because they have wealthy, famous, or well-connected parents. This is incredibly common in the world of entertainment. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that it's a rare feat to be in any of these fields as a 100% self-made individual. And to be fair, nobody really expects you to be one either. As long as you're decent enough at your job, you don't act like a dick, and you're at least slightly self-aware when you're asked about your familial connections, the majority of people don't really have a problem with Nepo babies. But in the case of Ben Platt, it's almost like the Sims personality slider scale is out of whack. He's really talented, probably more so than the majority of young Nepo babies around his age, so that should give him some bonus points in the general marketplace of vibes. However, when it comes to the Nepo elephant in the room, he cannot help but consistently make the worst choices all the time. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the peaks and valleys of Benny Boy's career, why his responses to the Nepo baby conversation are generally frustrating, and which parts of the Nepo baby discourse are even valid to begin with. And of course, before we get started, please give me a follow on Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, or TikTok, whatever floats your boat. Twitter in particular though, because I'm trying to gain my followers back after my previous account got suspended. It was a whole thing. Thanks so much. It's safe to say that Ben Platt was born for the stage. He was born in Los Angeles to his mother Julie and his father Mark, who was a notable film, television, and theater producer with credits like Legally Blonde, Into the Woods, and of course Wicked under his belt. Ben himself had a knack for performing at a young age, starring as a child actor in a number of musical productions. But his first big break came in 2012 when he starred as Elder Cunningham in the Chicago production of the musical comedy The Book of Mormon. Also in 2012, he made a prominent screen appearance as Benji in the musical comedy film Pitch Perfect, which is a movie phenomenon that I completely memory hold until right now. Not only did I somehow forget this movie existed, even though it was like the backbone of everyone's humor back in 2015, but I also totally forgot that Ben Platt was even in it to begin with. Should I do a Pitch Perfect video? Let me know. But Ben's major rise to stardom actually came a few years later with his breakout performance as Evan in the musical Dear Evan Hansen. Dear Evan Hansen first began performances at the Arena Stage in Washington, D.C. back in 2015, and then it had a successful off-Broadway run, which eventually resulted in a Broadway transfer at the Music Box Theater in 2016.
Say that it's possible. It's been my dream since I was a small wee child to be in an original musical and to originate a role.
And while I'm well versed in contemporary theater, Dear Evan Hansen has always been a pop culture blind spot of mine. I never saw it on Broadway or in any other touring iteration, and nothing about the soundtrack particularly sticks with me, I guess. I know what it's about, I know about all of the discourse around it, but as far as the actual show, from what I can tell, it seems like one of those situations where the score is actually pretty decent, and Ben's performance made it even better, while the book and the overall thematic scheme of the show could have used some work. Regardless of the material of the show itself and whether or not it should have won as many Tony Awards as it did over some other musicals, one thing was for sure. Ben Platt was the name on everyone's lips, winning a Tony for his role as Evan at just 23 years old, becoming the youngest ever winner in the Best Actor category. Ben went on to do some other post-Tony success things. He did a couple recording projects, some other television and screen work, and I think went into the later half of the 2010s mostly unscathed. But things soon flipped out of Ben's favor around 2020 when it was announced that he would reprise his role as Evan in the film adaptation of Dear Evan Hansen, which Ben's father, Mark, had secured the rights to and ended up producing. Now, there is quite literally hours worth of material explaining why the Dear Evan Hansen film adaptation is horrendous, but I'll list off a couple for you now. One, it's actually really difficult to do musical to film adaptations and vice versa. I actually took a whole class on this in college, and most of the case studies we looked at ended up being flops rather than box office successes. It's just not a genre that's easy to do. Number two, Ben Platt is horribly miscast in his role as Evan, mainly because at this point he was like 28 trying to play a high school kid, and the hair and makeup job they gave him legitimately somehow made him look older and creepier than he actually was. On top of that, Ben is a trained theater actor more than he is a film actor, so his expressions and overall demeanor in the film look wildly out of place. And three, the plot of Dear Evan Hansen is already ridiculous, but when you take it out of a theater context where more suspension of disbelief is naturally warranted, and put it in a more realistic film context, it is so visually and thematically jarring that it caused an entire re-examining and analysis of the original musical, in which many theater fans asked what Tony voters were smoking when they voted for it in the first place. It is all bad in every conceivable way, and Ben kind of doubled down in the worst way possible with this response in an interview that is now conveniently set to private on YouTube.
The reaction is largely from people that don't understand the context of the piece, Platt said during a June 2021 appearance on The Zach Sang Show. The fact that I created the role and workshopped it for 3 years, and did all of the out-of-town performances, and originated it on Broadway, and received the accolades that I did. And also not really understanding that were I not to do the movie, it probably wouldn't get made.
And that statement is actually not that inaccurate. Without Ben Platt, this movie definitely would not have been made, and that's because Ben's father, Mark, bought the rights to the film adaptation with his own son in mind. TLDR, Mark Platt tried to win Ben Platt an Oscar and ended up winning him a Razzie instead. Ben later expressed remorse for these comments in 2022, saying that the whole experience was ultimately really difficult and disappointing, and that rather than going on the defense, it's simply easier to let the film speak for itself and ignore the haters online, that whole thing. Okay, so in terms of the timeline here, that's where the Dear Evan Hansen saga kind of ends, but the thing that ignited the whole Nepo baby conversation and Ben Platt's role in it was an article that came out in 2022 tracking the current major Nepo babies running around Hollywood and their connections within the industry. It's a fascinating read, and an aspect of this conversation more engaging than the article itself is how these different Nepo babies ended up responding. Now, it's almost impressive how bad some of these responses are because they just seem really defensive and whiny, especially because no one is really demanding these people to comment on their connections. It's pretty well understood that most people in Hollywood are there because they have had some help along the ways, and in a lot of ways their talent actually does warrant their place in the entertainment world. A lot of these Nepo babies are actually pretty talented. But these bitter responses always come off so tone deaf because even if you're asked about it, all you have to do is go, yeah, my parents are famous and I benefit from that privilege. Maya Hawke is a good example of this, even making self-aware jokes at her own expense and situation, and that's really like all anyone ever wants in a case like this when it comes up. But I get it. It's probably really hard to be told by the whole internet that even though you may have worked hard, you inherently don't deserve something. That's a hard truth to accept, and it's clear that a lot of Nepo babies have a hard time accepting it. And when they have a less than desirable reaction to some public Nepo baby discourse, critics are really quick to eat them alive, because in some form or fashion, that feels just and good. We as a society love tearing famous people down, especially when it's objectively clear that they deserve it. So let's go back to Ben Platt and why we're talking about him today. In the time between the Nepo baby article and his recent controversy, he's been up to quite a bit. He's been starring as Leo Frank in the Broadway revival of Parade, and I got a chance to see the show back in March, and it was absolutely fantastic. He was great in it, and when there was controversy over the show itself, he responded in a very graceful and mature way, so he clearly is able to conduct himself professionally when it counts. It's not like he's this off-the-cuff dick all the time. That's the thing that's so frustrating, because, like, he's objectively very talented, but he keeps getting so defensive over the most minuscule bullshit. It's like, come on, dude, just be chill. Your dad made Wicked. Be chill about it. Anyway, Ben is still starring in the Parade revival, and he's also been doing press for a new movie he's in called Theater Camp. And when celebrities get ready to do the press junket to promote new movies, especially the more upscale entertainment journalism style stuff like Rolling Stone, you, or at the very least your publicist, should prep an answer for an uncomfortable question. And it is very clear that that did not happen. Okay, so let me summarize what went on in the infamous Ben Platt Rolling Stone profile. So, the profile is published in interview format, so it's mostly, you know, this is what the interviewer is saying, this is what Ben Platt is saying, and it's published that way. I'll show it on the side of the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. Ignore the fact that I have a band-aid on my palm. I fell on the sidewalk today while I was walking home from work like a dumbass, and now I have like 3 band-aids all over my body. It's embarrassing. Anyway, they start out talking about Theater Camp, which is clearly what Ben Platt came to Rolling Stone to talk about, and, you know, they have a conversation about the inspiration for the movie, what went on during the filming for the movie, you know, typical press junket stuff pre-SAG strike. This is also, it is clarified that, for those who are curious, this is all filmed, you know, recorded and done pre-SAG strike, so that sucks for Ben Platt, I guess. But, you know, unfortunate timing on that. They do the Theater Camp stuff, and then the interviewer asks about the Nepo baby article and his response to it. And he just goes, "We're just gonna skip over that comment." And the interviewer goes, "No comment." And then they just start talking about Parade, which is the other thing that Ben Platt is starring in right now. And so they talk a little bit about Parade and a couple other topics, and the publicist apparently is like in the room and is clarifying that they would just like to stick to questions about theater camp and whatever. And then the author like denotes that the interview was supposed to go on for another 45 minutes, and it's cut short, implying that Ben was probably uncomfortable with the Nepo baby question, and they cut the interview short altogether. So this is my take on this as someone who works in journalism. Hello, if you're new here, I work as a journalist as my day job, and I have conducted plenty of interviews. I know interview etiquette. And you might say, well, it wasn't fair game for the journalist to ask the question about the Nepo baby article because it was supposed to be a press junket thing for theater camp. A journalist has, the prerequisite to be able to ask whatever they want. If they feel that it's relevant to profiling a star in its entirety, which is what Rolling Stone typically sets out to do, even if they're interviewing a star specifically about like a movie or film that they're promoting, they have every right to do that. And Ben Platt has every right to not answer or give like a more diplomatic answer. But the thing is that whatever Ben Platt chooses to do in that moment is going to be published regardless of what he does. So for example, I work in TV news. A big example that I can point to is when Gayle King interviewed R. Kelly, and R. Kelly got up and threw a tantrum. Just because that's something that's like unorthodox and it's like an unorthodox response to something that happens in an interview doesn't mean that you don't publish that section of the interview. That is editorially dishonest. So whatever road Ben Platt chose to take in that moment was going to end up on the page and was going to probably make him look bad. What his publicist should have done was prep a diplomatic answer to that question, knowing that they were going to a place like Rolling Stone where a journalist is going to ask you questions about yourself and your livelihood up until this moment, because you're an actor. It's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows. That's what the talk show stuff is for. And this isn't a talk show, it's a profile, and the publicist should have known that. So I think that, he looks like an asshole after the fact, but I almost don't blame him as much as I blame the publicist for not prepping him for something like that. That's just mind-boggling to me. So the internet picked this up and ran with it, as it typically tends to do with these kinds of things, and one of the main discourse points that has come to light over the last couple days was that apparently Ben Platt is not the most easy person to interview. Apparently there's a lot of red tape with whatever publicist team that he's working with, and a couple of journalists have described situations where they've tried to interview him, not even referencing the Nepo baby stuff specifically, and the publicists have always been really tough and difficult and rather rude. And I guess ultimately the reason why I wanted to talk about this in a video is because the whole thing is just so strange to me. It's not like anyone is calling him a talentless hack that only got to XYZ place because of his father. Sure, that was part of it, and it's probably what got him a foot in the door, and it's what got him any professional theater training and prowess that he currently has. But he is very talented, and no one is disputing the fact that he's talented, or that he seems like kind of a nice guy outside of these bizarre moments where he blows up over the Nepo baby stuff. I can't figure out why it triggers him so much. And then there's also part of me that's like, is this criticism fair? That journalist probably knew going into that situation that Ben Platt would not have a great response to the Nepo baby discourse. I'm sure the journalist didn't think that the interview was going to get cut short over it, but I guess I could kind of see the perspective that like these Nepo babies have had to answer for this for quite some time now, because Nepo baby discourse has been a thing for quite some time now. But another part of the discourse that has been tiring to me is like, yeah, okay, we can ask Nepo babies about their connections in the industry and how they feel about them, and we're gonna get the inevitable "I work hard" response from most of them because that's how they feel about it. But what we're not talking about is the folks who aren't Nepo babies, who are actually trying to break into the industry. Many of them who are, marginalized groups, and they don't have the same access that Nepo babies do naturally. But what are those barriers? How can those barriers be removed or changed? How can we actually make the fields of screenwriting and film production and theater more equitable for everyone? I feel like that's a conversation that's more valuable. But what do I know? I'm just an idiot with a microphone, and you guys remind me of that in the comments every single day. It truly keeps me humble. And while you're down there in the comments, let me know what your favorite color is. Mine is purple. That's all for me, you guys. I will see you in a couple days for the RuPaul's Drag Race All-Stars 8 finale, and I'll see you next time.